Why? Has anybody ever heard me speak before? That's fantastic. Okay. Let's get the underlying things out. I'm 48 years old. I've been married 22 years to my high school sweetheart. We've got 3 children. Small business owner in Liberty County. I'm outside of Cleveland, Texas, just north of Houston. There's really nothing extraordinary about me. I'm just your average Texan. Christian, member of the school board, want the government to leave me alone and want to live our lives the way we see fit. And I can tell you that about 7 years ago, you're going to say, well, how does an average person just end up running for U.S. Senate? Well, about 7 years ago, I took up the arduous task of self-study in the Constitution. I got to a point in my life where I was very tired of people giving me sound bites on Fox and CNN and telling me this is constitutional, that's constitutional. And some of the things just were not working for me. When they got into Obamacare, they started talking about Obamacare, ACA, that's clearly unconstitutional. And you don't even have to have a degree in anything to know that's unconstitutional, right? So anyway, what I learned, I went back to the framers in Philadelphia, and y'all know the story, the state ratification debates and what the Constitution created. That's what I wanted to know, and almost immediately I found out that the Constitution, that gift that was offered to us by the framers and the states agreed to, was a republic based in federalism, and that doesn't exist anymore. So I like the idea that everybody likes to hold up the Constitution and quote Jefferson and talk about the fact that we're a republic, when in fact we're not. And I was one of those. We have taken that republic based in federalism, which is, for those who don't understand, federalism is the states hold all the expansive powers. Federalism is the states, that's the 10th Amendment. Federalism is the states hold all the expansive powers, except for those enumerated, few delegated powers we're supposed to authorize the central government. Well, that has declined to a point of where we are today, which is we are very much a nation, capital N, based in socialism. And I don't think there's a lot of people who can argue against that. The data is pretty clear. I would argue that we're actually the United States of America anymore. The several states that form the Union, those free and independent states as established in the Declaration of Independence, are now more like counties. My state representatives that I talk to around the state, some of them who know me, they get it. The ones that don't get a little irritated because I'll tell them really and truly that the state legislatures today are just branch offices of the federal government. They just administer the whims of a few elites in a town far, far away. We don't really manage our own affairs. The scary part to me is I'm not a historian or a scholar. I left Texas State University in my junior year. I was out of money and either had to feed myself or end up on somebody's couch. So I went to work. What I know is that our government and the structure it is today, the historical cycle of societies, the formula we have today is wrong. There's over 360 million of us in the United States today, and we are quite literally managed by 546 people. That is not local government. That is not a Republican form of government. To back that away a little bit more, we're actually managed by 5 of 9 unelected individuals. Supreme Court. Even though the Constitution is very clear to me and to most of the people that I know, it says that really they only have authority in anything pursuant to the laws of the Constitution, meaning those enumerated powers. Anything outside of that, they're not supposed to have any business dealing with. So I always ask myself, how is it in the state of Texas with the moral principle fiber that the people I know who live in this state, and I'm a native Texan, I love this state with all my heart. The moral fiber that we have here in this state, how is it that we can find ourselves today arguing with ourselves over whether or not it can be a choice to murder a child at 20 weeks in the womb and feel like we're gaining ground because we're passing legislation to restrict it to just 20 weeks? You know why we do that? It's because we all know that we're going to end up arguing over this national government over powers they do not have. We should not be arguing with the national government over things like abortion. not be arguing with the national government over whether or not burning an American flag or a Texas flag will put you a week in jail, or whether or not pornography is pornography or art, or whether or not we put God or the Ten Commandments or Scripture in a public building in the state of Texas. These are issues we've all been indoctrinated to believe are arguments that we're going to hold with the federal government. They are not. I'm just the one that says I'm not going to play by those rules anymore. The fact of the matter is, the position of U.S. Senator, in my view, and there are going to be people in here much more well-vested in history than I am, and we can talk about it all day, that position has been the most misused and abused position in the last century. Anybody that understands the 17th Amendment or the creation of the role? I'll take you back even farther than that. When the framers were together and people like Roger Sherman and George Mason were talking about the creation of the Senate, the whole purpose of the Senate was to protect the states. That was the priority. As a matter of fact, they talked in terms of, well, if we're going to create this new government, and this new government is going to have 3 branches, they're going to have these built-in checks and balances, well, then the states who hold all the power, they deserve a check. So the Senate was designed, as George Mason called it, to be the mechanism of self-defense for the states. And it was, for over 100 years, until the 17th Amendment. See, most of y'all will know this, but I'll say it anyway for anybody that does it. Originally, the state legislatures appointed their U.S. senators. And the reason they did that was because they could keep a rein on them. If the new government started behaving unconstitutionally or tyrannically, they could throw a wrench in the whole program with their senator. Well, the 17th Amendment in 1913, one of the best years in our history, I'm facetious, took that right away. Well, it did multiple things when they did that. When they forced the states to give up that power and made the U.S. senators voted on by popular vote, like a congressman, they did multiple things, and you'll never hear this in your history class or your government class or your civics class. This is a layman's viewpoint. When they passed the 17th Amendment, they stripped all state sovereignty. We lost all of our power. We have from that point forward to today, we've got nationalized. The states don't manage their own affairs at all, and it starts for me basically at that point. It also did away with what the framers called our bicameral system in the Congress. The Congress had 2 houses, bicameral. One was the lower house, and it was supposed to be, and it is, the most powerful body in government. Anybody that thinks, or if your teachers are teaching your kids or your grandkids that we have 3 branches of co-equal government, they're wrong. There's a reason why one body has the most people. The body that represents the people, the people's house. They have the power. They have the utmost power in Congress. They have more power than the Senate. They can impeach anybody in government. They can declare war. They can handle purse strings. They have the utmost power. They legislate our law, not a president with a pen. Right? Okay. If you look at the behavior of our senators for the last century, and you can put Senator Cornyn in this mix heavily. Generally speaking, and there's been a few exceptions, but generally speaking, across the board, they have voted to increase the debt, to increase the size and scope of the federal government, and to give it unconstitutional powers. All at the expense of who? The states. Us. So they've done the exact opposite of what the position was designed for. So if you look at what we have today, we have, and I always ask everybody in this room considers themselves conservative, right? Yeah. I am too. I'm a little simple for the people inside the Beltway because for some reason I consider being conservative having something to do with those truthisms like, well, you can't get out of debt by creating more debt, you know? But somehow that just misses all these people in D.C. and it has for a very long time. So I always ask everybody, okay, if you elected me as your U.S. Senator, and I went to Washington, D.C., and for 2 terms, I generally voted with the Democrats to raise the debt, to grow the government, to give it unconstitutional powers at the expense of you, would you elect me again? No. No. Absolutely not. But that's what's going on. We have a situation where we have a senator who votes from the time he gets into office, raise the debt, raise the debt, raise the debt. An election cycle shows up in 2007. He gets reelected in 2008, right? Primaries in March of 2008. He votes against the debt in September of 2007. I'm conservative. Marketing, gets reelected for the primary, which puts him in Texas. April, March, he's elected in the primary, nominated. April, raise the debt for years going forward. He voted for raising the debt over $17 trillion in March of last year. That close. No one was mad then. It took the cloture vote to get everybody emotionally charged about it. That was a knee-jerk reaction. I couldn't get anybody to talk about Senator Cornyn 2 years ago. Until Ted Cruz showed up, we weren't going to talk about it. But the fact of the matter is, he only voted against raising the debt on us in October because Ted Cruz had so much support, he was afraid it would affect his re-election campaign. I don't care anymore. I'm over that. This is my fundamental understanding. I want to be free. I want my children to be free. I want future generations of Texans to be free. And you cannot prove to me, there's no way you can convince me that by raising the debt at the federal level and putting that liability on us, you are doing anything in the best interest of me, or my children, or future generations of Texans. What you are doing is you're enslaving us through taxation with liabilities we didn't give consent for. And you're going to put us in servitude to this national government. And when you talk about taxation without representation, holy cow, the founders of this country fought a revolution over a 1 or 2% tax. The taxation without representation, Samuel Adams and the Tea Party, all of that argument, well, holy cow. When you're raising trillions and trillions of dollars in debt, and you are enslaving unborn children with the liability of your choices today, I don't think you can describe taxation without representation any stronger than that. They're not even here yet. So I'm of the belief that they're never going to change their ways. I believe, as Patrick Henry said, that the lamp of history should guide us. He even said that he knew of no way to judge the future but by the past. Well, folks, the behavior of this federal government is clear. We've got over a century of it. In the last 80 years specifically, they have proven they are not going to change anything about what they do. They're going to continue to grow at our expense. And they're going to continue to impede on our liberty, our freedom, our rights, and we're just serfs. I'm just one of those willing to say we're going to say more loudly and stand in front and do this job the way it's intended to be done. I would like to bring the discussion back to federalism. A lot of people have never heard that in popular media. If someone would ever stand up and say, hey, look, if you had federalism, none of us would be fighting with each other. Because if the people in Connecticut want to do something goofy that we don't like, that's fine with us. But we don't want you impeding us with the way we manage our affairs in Texas. And the rest of the state should have the freedom to do so. I get a kick out of it. We talk about free markets today. Everybody wants to talk free markets. Sounds really good. The framers of the Constitution were the original free marketeers. They designed a republic with all these different markets, states. And they gave these limited powers to this federal government. And they told the other states, we're not going to manage you, you're not going to manage us, you do what you want to do. And they knew that if a state started impeding on people's liberties, the people would leave. But what we have today is this big national government that reaches out across 316 million people and just passes national legislation to force everyone to live under one rule. That doesn't keep you free. National socialism has a history of really bad results. And we're on that path. I believe it. I'm not gonna sit back and let everybody say, oh no, we're American. That won't happen here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you crack a history book and get a little reality check and see what it looks like. We're not on a good path. The thing is that we've got 26 million people in the state of Texas. And everybody watches, anybody goes and checks out my website or checks out my campaign, my mantra is putting Texas first. And it doesn't have anything to do with Texas against the other states or Texas trying to do something out of the ordinary. I want to be the example for the other states to step forward and take their their affairs and start managing their own. The United States of America is as strong as it will ever be when the individual states can stand on their own. As long as we are abdicating all our power to the central and can't manage our own affairs, and we've got this debt-ridden fiat currency we're dealing with, we devalue the dollar so much, it's going to go away as a world reserve currency one day. As long as we do that, we are on a path to a major correction. And I think we're going to have a correction of it anyway. I'm just one of those things we need to grab that correction by the horns and try to manage it instead of letting it go until it collapses around our heads. So today, well, there's 26 million of us in Texas. But there's really no decision that we as Texans, other than national security or coin money or any of that thing, there's really no decision we can't make for ourselves that we need a bureaucrat 1,000 miles away to make the decision for us. Would you agree? Yeah. Just put it in context. There's 10 times more people in the state of Texas today than there were in all the states when they agreed to and ratified the Constitution. There's almost as many people in the state of Texas today than there were in the whole United States when they fought the Civil War. There's more of us, and there's still the same amount of people in D.C. who are managing us. So, the scale is an issue for us. If you like local governments, you like the idea of managing your own affairs, we're going to have to get the context back to federalism. We're going to have to drive that home. I want to do that. As far as, and everybody asks, what can you do as a senator? As a senator, you have that vote. And you have the voice. The vote's simple. For me, everybody lays their head down at night and they go, okay, well, Dwayne's in there, so nobody's raising the debt on his watch. It's not going to be because of him. I would never vote to increase the debt, not one more time. I would never vote to increase the size and scope of that federal government, that Leviathan, not one more time. And I would never vote to give it unconstitutional power. What I want to do is I want to start advocating very hard that we start divesting it of all that unconstitutional power back to the states and let the states manage their own affairs. That's where we're at today. If we don't start that curvature, we don't start that discussion back, our kids and our grandkids are going to be faced with this deal. And it's going to collapse on them. I think history's got a pretty good track record of this cycle. I'd like to be the first society in history because we have so much data, we have so much access to information. I'd like to be the first one to turn it around. And I got to tell you, I used to need Prozac after I was talking about the government because it depressed me so much. In the last year, I've been at this for a year, for those of you who don't know, just so you understand, all the candidates that got in, I had no idea there were that many candidates until after December. I've been at this for a year. I've talked to about 10,000 people. I'm glad these people got in. Now, for me, that means that people are getting emotional about it and they want to do something. I've met most of the other candidates. I think they're fine people, and I get that. I've got 1,000+ volunteers across the state. I'm a nobody, and I've got 1,000+ volunteers. My grassroots movement is very, very strong. I am so pumped by the Texans who came to the table to support this guy. I'm in awe of him. It floors me. I'm just a regular guy. But they get the message, and when they get into the message, there's something about federalism. When the light goes on, and you understand the basic founding principle of federalism, it doesn't go off. And when you start looking at the federal government through that lens of federalism and what the framers gifted us with, you start seeing all this, well, wait a minute, that doesn't work. You're not supposed to do that. What we have today is a total Congress that advocates all their power to a president who's not supposed to have any of it. Not supposed to have any of it. They have control over him. When did he become the controller of them? I'm 48. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime, and it's been progressively worse in my entire life. I don't see it correcting itself with the regular, consistent election of groomed, well-educated, not that there's anything against education, I'm talking about education in the political system. Those with political alliances, those with political affiliations who are groomed for office, and we just continue this insanity of doing the same thing over and over again. The framers wanted a constitution and a government that was going to be governed by those who were the governed. And that's us. It's not going to be an elite class. It's not going to be those who are special or or born into it. It's supposed to be those of us who actually work in the economy, who actually participate in the community. That's what I want to bring to the table. I am the least political or politician you will ever find. I come with no political alliances or affiliations in any way, shape, or form. None. I want to be a citizen statesman. I've never seen one in my life. I want to be one. I've been looking for one. I told everybody a year ago when I got in, I was running a petition to start with. And it went really, really well, really fast. And I had some people say, you got to quit running this petition. And then there were some people in West Texas that said, drop that petition, we'll pay the fee to get in. And I put it out to the volunteers I had at that time, and they said, yeah, if you got somebody that will pay the fee, do it. So we stopped the petition, I formally announced, and we started talking. Well, it's amazing how the grassroots of Texas, those of us, the people who make up the communities, we're so on the same page. Why I can't see that when I turn on the TV or the radio, I have no idea. But we are so much more dominant than the message on the radio. And we don't even know it. That's what kills me. But I'm so happy over the last year because I've seen so many people come to the table. And there's some points that we can point to. I mean, in the Senate, 10 years ago, we didn't have anybody. We had no one pushing for anything that had to do with constitutionality or correcting the path. No one. But today, I mean, we went from Rand Paul, now we got Mike Lee and Ted Cruz. We're growing exponentially in these people that want to take it back. So I understand the role of the U.S. Senator, and that is to protect the best interest of Texas. All they're really supposed to be is an ambassador from their state to the federal. What I'd like to do is open up that line of communication between our state capital and what's going on in the Senate. I know that sounds odd, but that's how it's supposed to work. If we have something that's going on at the Senate level and it's going to affect Texas, then we need to include our legislature in it and let them have a moment to talk about it. You're not a single rogue dictator as a senator going and representing 26 million people and just voting your whims. There is a pecking order. When I talk to everybody in terms of the pecking order of government, I'll say, well, if you have an issue in federal government, who do you go to? Well, you call your congressman, right? That represents the people. If you have an issue, if it gets out of Congress and goes to the Senate, who do you call? Well, then they call their congressman. I mean, their senator. Yeah, well, how's that working out for you? Yeah. There's 26 million of it. Even if only 1 million of us want to get a hold of them, how's that going to work? That's not really the pecking order. So how it's supposed to work, if we were following local governance and following a Republican form of government, if you got out of the Congress, you would call your state representative. And your state representative, that 150 of them, had easy access to that one U.S. Senator. So if it's pretty easy for you to get over your state representative. Should be anyway. So if you have an issue with what's going on, you think it affects us in some way, you need to call them. And then they need to get on that U.S. Senator. I told somebody at a group meeting, I said, so would you be offended if I shut down all those 6 or 8 offices across the state that don't do anything anyway? And called the Speaker of the House and Lieutenant Governor and said, find me an office in the state capitol with a phone jack, and I'm going to put an office in. During session, you guys can walk down there and make your complaints or whatever, make your ideas known. Out of session, we're going to have a little email list. We're all going to communicate. We're going to bring the state legislature of Texas right into the U.S. Senate and involve us in the decision-making process. At the same time, we're going to drive home the idea that Texans need to manage Texas, and Okies need to manage Oklahoma, and Cajuns need to manage Louisiana, and so on and so forth. We've got to turn this tide. We've nationalized so much of our lives that today we are waiting for dictators to decide for us what we're going to do, and we can't do that. We just can't. I see this as a breaking moment. But I see it as a positive, too. I see everybody in this room 5 years ago would have had 20 people in it. I believe that. But I see everybody's motivated. That brings me hope. I don't think you can lay down on this. I think everybody in this room understands we got to hold the rope and pull it. We got to make this happen. We're on the wrong path. If we weren't, then we would be here. And we all know it. This U.S. Senate's role is very, very important to getting the message across, even to the other states, but really here in Texas, getting it across that we need to reestablish our authority as a state of Texas, as do the other states. But it's a simple formula for me. I hope everybody else can kind of see the same pathway I'm on. If you got any other questions, you can go to Texans for Stovall. I got some cards here. I apologize for being late. It was freezing and ice and sleet when I left Cleveland. And those of you from the north, that's great. If you're a native Texan, you understand that when it starts and freezes in Texas, we all panic. So, yeah, there were cards everywhere. So, sorry I was late. But I've got cards here. It's TexansForStovall.com. We've got a website called Putting Texas First. It's for my volunteers. I forget what our count is, 1,000, 15,000, 20 volunteers across the state. We have another website that we started. I'm very proud of this. It's called All for Stovall. And it's hard for me to say that because it's so pompous. You're talking about yourself. All for Stovall, and it's a website. I was asking my campaign manager, how do you validate the endorsement at the feed store, at the grocery store, at the gas station? Those are so much more important than the guy on TV, the talking head who endorses somebody. You want an endorsement from somebody who may possibly have context to that individual's character. I mean, that's how it was originally designed. You're supposed to have some kind of context to these people's character. Who are they? So if someone says, I know so-and-so, sister, brother, family, whatever, or I know him, or he's in my school board, or whatever, you need to get some of that information. Well, we started this website and allows individuals to go show their support, and they can endorse me, and it's validated publicly. You can go read, and I don't know how many people are on that thing, but it's been up for about 2 weeks, and it had 1,000 people on it in no time. But I'm very proud of it. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy. But this is going to be tough. Everybody knows money is the issue. We definitely need money. It's costing more and more as we go along. And donations are always going to be slow coming from grassroots because we're not the richest folks on the block. And it's tough to beat that out-of-state special interest PAC money. It comes in so heavily. When you've got someone else at Corning who carries $6 or $7 million at a time, and he puts out consistent advertisements about being as conservative as you or me or Texas. He's just waiting for an opportunity to go grow the government on our backs a little bit more. It's a little offensive, but he's got the money. We've got to figure out how to get around that. So I'm asking you, if you want to get involved, donate if you can. It's very, very important that we do that. But go to the website and join the team if you can too. And the biggest thing we tell everybody is money is such a big issue. This is our biggest statement. Talk is cheap, so do it. Do it a lot. It doesn't cost you anything. Talk to everybody you can. Call everybody in your family and your friends. But I really appreciate the chance to come talk to everybody. It's been very positive for me, and I hope everybody understands that we're going the right direction with our elections. We can just get some people who understand the Constitution back in there and start reining this thing in. Thank you very much.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you prevent yourself from being
Corrupted.
corrupted? Yes.
Let's see, everybody in this room has asked that how many times? What happens to them?
Yeah, what happens?
They get elected, they go to Washington, D.C., and holy cow. I can tell you that if you set, this is my perspective, if you set the ground rules before you ever get there, like if you say, I'm never voting to raise that city, that you kind of clear cut yourself. If you go there and raise the debt ceiling one time, you shot yourself in the foot. I don't have an issue with that. I always tell everybody, elect me, come to Washington, come visit me, because it'll be absolutely quiet and all. Easy visitation. I don't know what happens to people. All I know is that the affiliations, that groomed kind of political connection that people seem to be in when we elect them, seem to take that with them. I don't think it's necessarily that they go there and they change so much as if they were already kind of planted that way, and they go, and then, you know, that's what the Tocqueville say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I really don't know much about your background as far as, have you worked in Washington at all, or?
No.
Okay. Have you been in politics at all?
No.
Okay.
I'm on the school board at Tarkington Independent School District. I'm with a company called Diamond K Equipment Incorporated. When I left Texas State, I went to work for what was then Arco. I remember the Arco Spark. They spun the facility I was working at into Lyondell Petrochemical, and then they spun into Lyondell Citgo, and then spun into something else. I left there shortly after 9/11. I started a company, Diamond K, in '96. I was still working for what was then Lyondell, doing double duty. It was like living like a double agent. I would go to a meeting. I would go to a morning meeting at a facility there in Houston, and then I would get out at lunch and go get on an airplane at Hobby and fly to Amarillo and be in a meeting with TxDOT in Amarillo at 4 o'clock. That's just a typical, that's how it worked. We didn't always work in Amarillo, but that was typical. I built bridges for the highway department for 15, 16 years. That's my history. We started a company called Liberty Testing about 3 years ago. We do quality control and pipelines. I was born in an Humble camp in Baton. You know what that is? You ever heard of Humble camp? Yeah. El Oilfield. Humble is the original Exxon, Esso, Humble. Yeah, so I don't fall far from the oilfield tree. Yes, sir.
May I make a couple of additions?
Sure.
On the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment is about federalism also. It's to arm the state against enemies, external enemies, and against the central government as well.
Or internal enemies.
And so that's about federalism also.
Sure.
And also, I'd like for you to promulgate the word statism.
Oh,
Statism is where the people give the power to the central government for economic planning and policy.
Correct.
And that is the enemy. That defines communism, it defines fascism, it defines socialism. And they're all the same. That is the factor that determines our political attitudes.
That's true.
And my only other addition, I don't know how to fight statism, but if they have a constitutional convention, they might consider disenfranchising government workers at their level of employment. That's my most radical idea.
The radical idea, and if you want to get off into some details, the radical idea is that you can convince the public and you can give them the will, because the will of the people is the one that's going to make it happen. If you can give them the will to agree to not allow that government to raise the debt. Because I have people, GOP members who are staunch 50, 60-year GOP members who are like, you can't do that. And I go, are you conservative? Well, yeah. Well, how do you justify increasing the debt when you know the path wrong? They'll sit there, it's like a split personality. Can we sustain what we're doing? No. Then we can't raise the debt. Well, you can't stop raising the debt. Okay, but you can't sustain what you're doing. It's this vicious cycle. Let me explain something. These are numbers, okay, budgetary means. If you took all the money that we spend to service our debt, all of it, you took all the money we spend on military, including veterans benefits, Veterans Affairs, if you took all the money we spend on the Department of Health and Human Resources, if you took the Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all the entitlement programs, all of that, and you put it all together, it works out to be about $2.6, $2.7 trillion. We took in around $2.9 trillion this last cycle. So we're not arguing over whether or not our friends and family members in the military are going to get their checks, or whether or not grandma in Florida is going to get her Social Security check. That's the rhetoric they use to screw us. Okay? What we're actually arguing over is the 2.5 million people that, air quotes, work for the federal government. That's 2.5 million people. That does not include your military. Our military is only about 1.5 million people and shrinking. So when the time comes for them to raise the debt ceiling, they'll never talk about the fact that, well, you know, we could cut the Department of Education. We could kill the EPA. Right? We could kill the Department of Energy. By the way, they're unconstitutional anyway, but, you know, hey, who's saying? That's not the issue. What you have is this very centralized group of people who manage our money before we ever see it. They're stealing from us 24 hours a day, folks. 24 hours a day. While you're sleeping, they're taking our money before we, fruits of our labor, before we ever see it. They don't need to sell us a bill of goods on how they can keep the Department of Education or any of these other plethora of hundreds of unconstitutional agencies. What they're trying to sell us on is the rhetoric that scares us into saying, okay, we'll raise it one more time. We don't want her to go out without her Social Security check. That's not the issue. We can still, even today, we can still cover those aspects and our national security. The issue is, who's going to get up there and say, no, we don't raise the debt anymore. If you don't take in enough money to cover the cost of these other unconstitutional areas, they must go. Yes. You can't sustain them, they must go. Every human being in this country knows you can't sustain what we're doing, but we continue to do so. Really and truly, there's so much steps going on that people don't even realize. I mean, the fact that everybody understands quantitative easing. And the Fed is buying our debt at the rate of about $85 billion a month. We call that quantitative easing infinity. It's never going to stop. Well, what they're doing is a double-edged sword. They're buying debt to keep interest levels low because so many people are upside down in everything they do. They couldn't afford it if interest levels actually went to a market value. The government could not handle interest rates rising to pay for the debt, so you got to keep the interest rates low. Well, what that does is it also devalues the dollar. So those of you that had a nice nest egg 10 years ago who thought they were going to retire, for some reason that loaf of bread just doesn't cost the same as it did 10 years ago. Well, that's theft. That's inflationary theft. They're devaluing the dollar, and what you earned all your life is worth less than it was when you retired. So there's so much really evil process going on with this government, the way it manages its affairs. I pose to you that if you can figure out how to get the message out there loud and proud that you never raise the debt ceiling again, you necessarily rein it in. You necessarily get it under control. That's really the only tool it has, is money. You can take every aspect of the government you don't like, it's all managed with money. You rein in the money, you rein in every other aspect of it. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the fair tax proposal?
A little bit. There's a number of twists to that. I'm okay with it to a point. There's a problem with the fair tax as far as the people that want to go into more of a consumption tax. There's no constitutional authority for a national sales tax. So that would take a constitutional amendment. The IRS, we've got time, right? The IRS is the worst agency in the federal government. Besides the EPA. And the EPA and the IRS work together at the time. The fair tax issue, we're all getting around the idea, how do we eliminate the IRS aspect and get the taxes down where everybody is contributing equally at the federal level? I'm open to any kind of discussion about that because the IRS has become a rogue agency. Now, I'm going to give y'all, this is my own perspective. If anybody knows more, please tell me. I'll go back and research what you tell me. Does anybody ever wonder how it is a bureaucrat who's not elected in a very nice office in Washington, because they don't use cubicles, they do cubicles for us, they build themselves monuments. A bureaucrat in an office in D.C. can take out a piece of paper, write down an edict, hand it to his boss can go, yeah, that'll work, hand it back to him, and the next day, someone dressed like SEAL Team 6 can come to your house and point a gun to your head and say, you will comply, or I will jail you or worse. Have you ever wondered how that happens? I think I found it. 1947, they passed the APA, it's called the Administrative Procedural Act. Because the government was growing so fast, you know. The Congress didn't have time to look through all these rules and regulations, right? I mean, they needed help with that. So they made this act that would expedite rules and regulations. Well, what's another word for regulation? Law. So today, I don't know what the exponential number is, but I guarantee you there's a ton more laws being created by unelected individuals in an office in the EPA, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, and the IRS that your congressman never lays eyes on, ever. And they come with that kind of force. So you can go to your congressman and you can say, the IRS came and said that if I don't do this, the EPA said, if I don't do this at my barrier, if I don't, they're going to jail me. And your congressman can go, really? Because they don't know. But the Constitution is clear. The Congress is going to legislate law, not an individual we hired at a rate 3 times the free market to work in a nice office in D.C. So, yeah, I might yank some change by stepping up and saying, I found something I'd like to repeal. Let's start with the APA. Let's take all that authority away from these agencies to write their own law, because that's what they do. They write law. They're not our congressmen. We've got to get everybody re-educated on this. Trust me, I didn't learn this in school. These are all things. I'm 48. I was in my 40s before I got interested in this, and now I'm mad. So don't let them smile fool you, you know? Yes, sir.
So is your commitment to the citizens going to be that you're never going to vote in favor of any legislation that violates the Constitution?
This is the way the rules work. Yes, is the answer. This is the way the rules work. This is the way I see them. It's very simple. Any one of us can be a U.S. Senator, by the way. So we don't need to have a degree for anything.
What you just described, I've experienced the same thing being kind of in the farming business, is that the Congress passed a law regarding gathering information, and then the USDA turned around and wrote a rule. They sent me a letter that says, if you don't fill out this form, you'll be fined, because this is required by law. So I backtracked and I looked at the law, because I assumed the law was unconstitutional. The law was not unconstitutional. It was a rule that was written outside of that law,
Right.
which crossed the barrier. And one of the areas you could fix too is that these lies about the National Defense Authorization Act, that they have to finance the military every 2 years.
Right.
You read the Constitution, and that 2-year funding only applies to the Army, not the Navy.
Hey, let's be realistic. The Constitution created the government. Okay? The states came together, they designed this Constitution, they agreed to what it said, they ratified it, and that created the government. If it doesn't follow the Constitution, what is it? A rogue government? I think it's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they don't care 1 ounce, 1 iota about the Constitution. It's going to take driving people up from the bottom and shoving that Constitution down their throat to make them snap to. I don't know what happened. I don't know how we got to the point like you're talking about with these unconstitutional authorities being taken by these agencies, but it's happened. So we've got.
It started with the 16th Amendment when they
Oh, yeah.
violated direct tax.
Yeah, when they allowed taxation.
Once you can tax someone directly as an
destroy it.
individual, that's the primary step toward enslavement.
Back to what I'm saying about the debt. You own the money, you have the power. You control that debt, you can control that government. What you were asking earlier about how do you vote, for me it's very simple. There's 3 hurdles. When you look at anything proposed on the floor of the Senate, you say, does it qualify under the U.S. Constitution? That's an easy question. And if it passes that, you look at it and you say, okay, does it qualify under the state of Texas Constitution? If it passes that, you only have one other question, and that question is, what are the long-term effects on the state of Texas? And if it's negative, it is a no. You never, ever go along with anything that has a negative impact on the state of Texas. And I would vigorously advise other senators from other states to vote the exact same way. If it gives all 49 other states some great benefit, but it hurts us, it's a no. That's the balance. Yes, sir.
There was a bill a couple of years ago that required each bill written to reference a section of the Constitution that authorizes it.
Yeah.
Of course, it went nowhere.
Yeah, well, no, it passed.
Well, there.
Yeah, it passed. You know what that meant? That meant, okay, we're gonna make photocopies of general welfare and commerce clause. So, hey, you wrote something? Okay, what do you think? General welfare and commerce clause. Speak commerce clause. Yeah, it was a complete waste of time. I like the idea. The problem is they really believe it. They believe the Commerce Clause states that they can come in and regulate industry inside the state of Texas. That was never the intended Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause was for the federal government to keep commerce between the states regular. It had nothing to do with them centrally planning the economy and industry. We're so far outside those bounds, it's not even funny. Yes, ma'am.
Are you planning on talking to the Tea Party groups around the country?
I've been endorsed by the Kaufman Tea Party, the Alton Tea Party, the Pearland Tea Party, the Tri-County Tea Party. I've been endorsed by Tea Party 9/11, and there's just a laundry list of Tea Party leaders. I guess you'll understand. We'll go back to the government for a second. You understand how many Tea Parties are regulated by the government they can't endorse? Okay, well, I've got a ton of leadership and presidents of Tea Parties that are endorsing me. So I'm the only candidate. Oh, by the way, I am the only candidate endorsed by the Tea Party. So, don't read National Review and think there's somebody else. Steve Stockman is my congressman. I know Steve. No, he's not a Tea Party candidate.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
In the mail, we got absentee ballot to vote, and everything has been underlined, Corning, Green, all the way down. They're picked. Who in the heck's been sending all those out?
That's something we can talk about.
Rita, that is from Texans for Conservative something or other. It's a big tricolor. That is a very liberal group out of Houston.
That's
There it is.
that's Steve. That's Steve Moss.
Well, that's Dr. Holtze.
Yes,
Dr. Holtze and his crew. And we fought them at the state convention 2 years ago. They somehow finagled the platform committee to vote for what they call the Texas solution.
Oh yeah.
And the Texas solution was, the convention was ended late in the day. They said it was too late, we can't finish. They had us come back at 9 o'clock at night to vote on the platform. Well, 90% of the people could care less. They wanted to go home, it was late. And lo and behold, when it came down to the Texas solution plan, who is first in line, and I have to use a candidate's name here because this is just the way it is. Jerry Patterson. He was not a delegate. They had him first in line, and he and Dr. Holtze and Norm Adams and all that crew.
The members of the committee.
Yeah.
They stole the microphone.
They stole the microphone, and half the committee, half the members, oh yeah, let's vote, we want to get out of here. That's the kind of thing that happens.
And they voted on a sound vote.
Yeah.
Said the ayes have it.
And you couldn't tell the difference.
Right.
It was the most awful thing that I've ever experienced.
Y'all remember the Texas solution?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we softened up everything. No more illegal aliens, undocumented. I mean, it sounded like they were members of the family.
So if you can, please pass the word on. I plan to put out something, I haven't had time, that is not a conservative group, and that's a trick that they use. They'll put the word in there, conservative. And you don't know where they stand unless you've had the back experience. And you know who Dr. Holtze is, who Norm Adams is, and the rest of his crew. And I have a ton of research on it because I had done some work on immigration reform, and that's when we learned about it. So I'm sorry I took a few.
Okay. If you find pictures of Jerry Patterson's microphone, you'll find the bald-headed guy standing right behind me. That's me.
That was you?
That's me. Yeah, he was in line. He asked me, so are you for or against? And I said, I'm absolutely against. And he said, what for? And they called. And he turned around and there was a federal prosecutor standing behind me. He started addressing me down. That he was 20 years in the judiciary and he had all this experience with illegals. And I said, oh really? I said, I've been working next to him since I was 15 years old. There's not a whole lot you can tell me about their plight. That's not the issue. The issue is we're destroying the traditions and values of Texas. And if you guys keep going like this, we're going to end up destroying the republic as a whole. Well, you should have been in the committee. We had members of this is the funny part, how to get off this. We had members of the business community in the committee hearing, and they were all supportive. I said, I'm a business owner in construction. I can put 9,000 members of business owners in this building right now and read them the platform, and they're all going to clap for it because it does nothing to stop them from doing the exact same thing they've done for the last 40 years. It's exactly the same. You're just enabling them to continue doing business as usual. I know. I mean, I was in the bridge building business for 15 years. You come across illegals pretty regular, so. Anyway, was there another question? Somebody had their hand up. Yes, sir.
What is your position on foreign aid?
Find me a spot in the Constitution where it says we can take your money and give it to somebody else. I don't find it. I get it, and if they want to make a case for it in front of the Congress and let all of us have a chance to whack on the Congress, then that's great. But there's no constitutional authority for them to take the earnings of you and your children and give it away to a country that. Right. That's all.
Question. Do you have any idea on how we could clone you to be representative like you are in any of the other states? We need your type.
There's some good ones out there.
We need more of them.
Wow. I guess everybody understands Mitch McConnell's got somebody fighting against him right now. I want y'all to know the establishment we talk about all the time is very, very powerful. And we all talk about that. I know that up close. I didn't know it as well as I do today, but I've been contacted by people who were very big supporters of the RNC and the state GOP who made it perfectly clear that if I get traction, and I'm about to get traction, that they're going to campaign against me. So you're going to hear everything under the sun. I'm not wealthy. Who cares about that? Harvard. Right, I didn't go to Harvard. One of them got, well, what it comes down to is my position against raising the debt. Because whether we like it or not, even though they're enslaving us and devaluing our dollar at the same time, there is a group of us, some of them on the Republican side, who actually benefit from the creation of debt. And they are going to fight tooth and nail to keep us from stopping the path we're on. Yes, ma'am.
Have you been endorsed by the Senate Conservatives Fund?
No, ma'am. I'm a nobody.
You're a nobody.
I'm a nobody.
Help from them.
They might get on board once we get a little. I've just started getting a little national attention. Breitbart picked up an article about me last week. Matter of fact, it was odd because we put out a press release and they took a press release and ran with it. So somebody's paying attention. A lot more attention than we thought. But it's going to, if I were to say this race is very fluid, I'm making light of it. It's going to get very loud over the next couple of weeks. I didn't realize the investment I've made talking to everybody for the last year is going to come back like it has. The grassroots, we're all very quiet generally, but we're rooted. So I've been in 4 straw polls against Cornyn and Stockman, and I've won all 4 of them. I'm just saying. I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
710 radio, 75%.
I've been on, the radio. I won one in Lubbock, and I haven't been to Lubbock yet. But I was on the Mark Davis show there in Dallas. That was interesting. Anybody listen to Mark Davis?
No.
Mark Davis is interesting. He's nationally syndicated. You'll see him sit in for Hannity or somebody. He's the guy that will interview you. Yeah, Rush. He's the guy that will interview you and then hang up the phone and go, yeah, that's never going to happen. Right? So I'm going to tell you this. He hung up the phone with me. I was in Austin. I got a son that, I got 3 kids. 2 of them are in college. One is out at UT. And I'd done an interview with him on top of the parking garage at UT. I stopped to visit my son on the way to Preparatory. And I finished the interview and I hung up and just took off. And my phone just blew up. They want to know, are you listening to him? And I said, no. Is he cutting me apart, you know? Is he thrashing me? And they said, no. Well, my campaign manager had taped it on his phone and he sent me a media file and I listened to it. It was funny. He hung up the phone, thanks, we'll talk again, hands up the phone, and he goes, okay, he's good. So I got a total kick out of that. He had made a reference. The only reason he had me on, I think he was looking for an opportunity to just lambast me. Because a few days earlier, he had made a comment on the air that anybody that thinks a Stovall guy is anything more than a long shot is high. So, like, 500 people went after him on social media and email. So he brought me on the show. Well, we talked for 15 or 20 minutes, and 50 minutes or so. And after he got off, he said, well, okay, for those of you that heard me say he's a long shot, I'm going to step off that. So it was very meaningful, and that did mean a lot. There were a lot of other media outlets that had changed their tune. So yeah, things are changing, and they're changing for the better, I guess. My wife keeps saying it's going to hurt. Something's going to happen. Anything else?
Who's your campaign manager?
A man named Brett Rogers.
What's his background?
He's a computer guy.
What's his background in politics?
He helped start the Tea Party in Iowa. That's basically it. This is interesting. My campaign manager, he's from Iowa. Don't hold that against you. You're from Iowa? He's a good guy. He got there as fast as he could. We did his lesson here. He called me about 3 months ago, and he said, hey, you and I need to meet. And I said, why? And I was in for a day. I was having dinner with my family. I said, well, I'll meet dinner. If you want to come to Cleveland, Texas, we're going to go in town. And he came, and we visited for an hour. He has software that he designed that does all of my volunteer work, and it's on a number of other campaigns who have come to him since he left Iowa. He's a design guy. Very, very personable guy, and he said, I've read what you said, I hear what you say, I totally agree with you, and I want to help you. So I rocked him up for about a month or 6 weeks, and I was talking to people who were in the know in politics in Texas, and I want to find a campaign manager. You got to do this right. I'm a businessman, so you got to do this right. And the people I had narrowed it down to were very good, and they were very well versed in politics in Texas. But the longer I talked to them, the more I disliked the fact that they were so well versed in politics in Texas. I'm not, and so I called him and I said, hey man, you're as far outside of Texas politics as you can get. And he said, yeah. I said, you ever ran a campaign? He said, no. I said, you want to try one? He said, for you, yeah. So I'm going to tell you right now, we've got the best campaign in the state. I don't care who they are. I mean, I've got the best campaign there is. We're the most organized, most well-run. It's incredible. I'm just floored with it. Yes, we're the outsiders coming into the political realm. Somebody else? Oh, somebody else. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. How do you feel about term limits?
I love it. Y'all want context of term limits so I can give you the argument? The argument is here. When the framers designed the Constitution, they put a formula in there for us. Everybody read the Constitution? You ever seen the 30,000 citizens per representative? Okay, that was a range, and it was supposed to stay around that area. They actually had formulas built in for how the Congress would grow. The reason it was 30,000, they argued numbers, but the reason it was 30,000 was because in a community of 30,000 people, there was a really high likelihood that you would either know that individual personally, or you would know someone that knew that individual personally. It would be back to what we said earlier, that context of character. You would know who they were. And if they behaved poorly in a community of 30,000 or so, you could quickly get them out of office. Well, 1920, 1926, somewhere in there, I'm going to tell you, the redistricting issues we deal with in Texas? Yeah. Okay, well, that's been going on for a very long time. During the early 20th century, the sitting Congress had a lot of growth in population going on. There was going to be a lot of new additional seats added to the Congress. So they took it upon themselves to pass a rule in the House that limited the Congress to 435 people. That's why we have 700,000+ of us to one country. So today, you have almost no context of their character. If you shook their hand at church one day, or you shook their hand at the ag show, or you saw them out and they were marketing themselves, that's all you get. You don't get what they're like at the grocery store or running down the road to their neighborhood. So we're totally out of contact with our representatives through context. You have to have term limits today. Under the original framework, we were the term limits. We would all know who they were, and if they behaved poorly, we get them out.
That's right.
We don't know who they are now. So this is kind of like the speed limit. We all know that driving 75 or 50, that doesn't matter driving. We all know people are going to die driving. But we accept that portion of the risk for the benefit of being able to drive or fly or any of that. You have to accept the risk of losing a good representative in a pool of a whole lot of bad representatives to be able to get them out of office. So I'm one of those things, we need term limits. Seriously, we need term limits. That's where that comes from, by the way. Anybody that says, we are the term limits, go, yeah, really? Yeah, how are we going to manage that? We don't know who these people are. Yes, ma'am.
If you get elected as our senator, how are you going to make these changes that you've been talking about? How are you going to turn our country around?
That question is very similar to the one you gave. How are you going to fix it? I like that one. But the issue is, you vote the way you say you're going to vote. You always uphold the Constitution. You always uphold the right of the state of Texas. After that, it comes down to discourse. You've got to change the discourse. You've got to get the aspect of federalism that none of us ever hear on TV or discussed. Media pundits never talk about it. States' rights are pushed way down here. I have a friend who took the bar exam to be a lawyer and said they went to the pre-class, and the class said, if you ever see an answer that says 10th Amendment, that's not the answer. What? Just so we're clear, the 10th Amendment is the answer to every single unknown question to the Constitution, all of them. If a congressman comes together with a president and a senator and a member of the judiciary and they go, well, do we have this power? And everybody goes, well, I'm not sure. It ends. It falls to it's answered by the 10th Amendment. The states have the control over that. They don't go, well, we'll figure out a way to take that power. That's what they've done for the last 100 years. So changing the discourse and pushing the message forward and getting that out front and center. And re-education is a tough word, but it's basically getting everybody to relearn and re-educate themselves on what the premise of the Constitution was and what federalism is. That's a huge issue for me. I think federalism fixes everything.